Always vigilant.
Now, let me start by saying that most of the script was written a year ago. This was the one I was talking about in the other video where I kind of just, wrote it and never made a video on it. So now I am. But that's just to say that some things here might be a little bit outdated, and hopefully some things here might have more information on it now that it's been a year. If I find that, more people are interested in this topic and I want to do the research, I'll, make another one that's a little bit more information based, I guess. Anyways, not adding any unnecessary mechanics to a game is a core belief of mine. If you've seen my other video on, the development, or I guess the leading up to the development of Hallowed Crucible, you can kind of see the lessons that I, learned from that and from developing that game, which is that if I am going to add classes to my game, it needs to have a reason and have purpose, just like any other mechanic. Like, I don't hate GTA or God of War or Assassin's Creed Odyssey by any means, but in some cases, hunger doesn't make sense and having a crafting system doesn't make sense. And I'm sure you've seen the videos describing those issues. Also, I am not the first to research class design, nor am I the first to make a video on it. Chances are that if you stumbled across this, that you have most definitely seen those and will know what I'm talking about when I throw around terms like player agency or subclasses. However, I am the first to look in this topic with the unique perspective of having my current project and past projects. Not that others haven't, done research specific to their projects, but I would just like to, kind of give my take on things. Also, really, there wasn't any specific research to survival games in, terms of RPG and class mechanics, so 90% of what I'm about to say is, in fact, just my opinion. Now, I would like to also clarify that, for the sake of this video at least, roles and classes are different subjects. Roles describe the interactions between the player and enemy/allies, as Adam Millard puts it, ally to enemy, and enemy to ally. More specifically, I would define the roles as the end result interaction of an interaction. For example, if a druidic class specializes in interacting with nature to prevent the enemy from advancing, then that technically fulfills the role of a tank because at the end of the day, it decreases the effectiveness less interaction of enemies on allies. When I talk about classes, I talk about the archetypical style of play associated with certain character traits, the quick and nimble assassin class or the slow or beefy warrior class. Though one is definitely more thematic to play one role over the other, it is not hard to imagine both being viable for any role. That viability being dependent on the game and how it's designed, of course. But should they? Why don't games with classes just allow the player to pick whatever skills they want and further specialize should they want to? Well, I'm sure each game with said systems has their reason, but for my game, and from my perspective, it's about balance. Balancing between freedom and player experience, creativity and direction, balancing in order to make something fun, immersive, or both. From my experience as a gamer and general observation, players tend to gravitate towards these archetypical styles of play and roles, whether or not the game supports those systems. Some games are better off with them, and some are not. And now finally, we kind of get to the topic of this video, classes in survival games. How are they used? How are they different in survival games? And how/should I implement them? Well, how are they used? In general, it depends on the game. Duh. But what are some survival games they exist in? Terraria doesn't have any classes in the traditional sense, but it supports it. There's no class selection screen or any locked abilities, but there is armor that you can equip that provides certain set bonuses that lean into class-orientated playstyles. In Terraria's case, melee, ranged, magic, and summoner, and that's if you don't play without mods. Each based on a damage type and each with their own distinct playstyle, not necessarily distinct roles. Could a mage be considered support with healing wands and spectral armor? Sure. Could a melee build prevent damage to their team and prevent crowd control? Not really, not as a tank, because, there's no real aggro system in the game. This balance between encouraging the player to pick a class and enforcing the player to pick a class or role is, in my opinion, what makes their system great. To improve upon it, we will look at another survival game. V Rising has a very similar class system to Terraria. In addition to the set bonuses, you can synergize with spell and weapon selection instead of just being locked into one weapon type. And this allows for the players to really specialize into roles should they want to. Not only that, but their set bonuses can come in pairs. Instead of wearing the full set, which provides a better bonus to one specific class, the player can wear half of one and half of the other in order to make some kind of hybrid style play. This is further encouraged by the fact that nearly all the stats provided by the armors have hard caps, so stat-obsessed junkies like myself could further tweak their builds to provide the maximum stats they can get while specializing into a role. Again, a wonderful balance between encouragement and enforcement. The last game I want to bring up as an example is Enshrouded. Because I haven't had the chance to really play through this game entirely yet, I don't have a whole lot to say about it, but this game is much closer to the traditional system found in RPGs and MMOs. Instead of encouraging players through set bonuses and armor perks, they use a skill tree and attribute system. For their game, this works really well. One of the benefits of the system is when the player picks a class, there is more definition and identity to their playstyle, even though the player mostly has access to the entire tree. A great balance of player agency and player freedom. Well, what do I mean by that? I'll give actually one more example of a game for what happens when there isn't that balance. And excuse my rant for a second, but Destiny 1 and 2, but more so 1, has 3 classes, Hunter, Titan, and Warlock, but only has 2 roles, support and damage. However, the feel and identity of these classes is mostly the same. Cosmetically different, sure, and different abilities, but at the end of the day, you are just chucking grenades and shooting things. This lack of identity within one class, or the classes, shouldn't really even exist due to the inaccessible skill trees of other classes. You can't dodge if you're a Warlock or punch your way out of trouble if you're a Hunter, but actually that's exactly what is happening, coupled with the lack of a necessity for tanks and the fact that Hunters are restricted to only being able to dodge in the ground with no added speed boost, is a result that makes Titans have an identity crisis, Hunters the space barbarian, and Warlocks the king of speed. So in Destiny's case, the misapplicated enforcement of the class system is a problem that leaves class identity feeling muted, which takes away from the agency of even picking a class in the first place. It also doesn't help that if I wanted to punch things in Terraria, I could either pick the cool cowboy class with a cape or the class that gets nerfed every day with a butt towel. Yes, I do have a Hunter bias, but so does Bungie. Now, how are they different in survival games? Earlier, I talked about how I defined roles, but I left out one key piece of information. That is that the idea of tank, support, and damage really only applies when there are enemies. Many survival games that include combat also offer peaceful modes, and some survival games don't even offer combat at all. So while combat is not exactly something we could ignore because I'm myself developing combat in most of my games, and outside combat, survival games have their own roles. Gatherer, crafter, and builder. The gatherer grabs materials, the crafter refines those materials into better materials and supplies, and the builder builds up the base. However, in survival games, each player needs to have access to these roles in order to, survive. Ignoring the obvious issues inaccessibility would cause in solo play, performing the same role over and over and over again would get tedious and boring extremely fast. This does happen with combat roles in many games, but the action and inherent fun of the combat hides it most of the time. In most MMOs, you can choose a profession, but there is no designated cook that just kind of follows the group around and cooks while they do all the fun stuff, unless that cooking minigame is extremely intense, fun, and requires mastering, which case to each their own. This diversity of roles becomes even more complex and apparent in survival games with a PvP focus, as bases will need defenders, supplies will need to be distributed, and base locations become vital. Although I am focusing my game on co-op and PvE, I haven't made the decision to fully exclude PvP capabilities quite yet. Although locking these survival roles behind classes is a terrible idea, we can still kind of enforce a class system on these roles to provide a greater sense of class identity and player agency. Maybe the sneaky damage role rogue picks up gatherings so that they can hunt and survive behind enemy lines with greater efficiency and less risk. Or the wise support role mage picks up crafting to really immerse themselves as the team's caretaker. What I am saying is not the end-all be-all of the topic. Much of what I am saying is just my way of categorizing these roles. It doesn't take much looking into to provide evidence that makes the definition of these survival roles fall apart. One could even argue that fundamentally, tanks and supports are the same thing if you define a support role as supporting your team. In any case, how would I implement them? So for the sake of my game, I think it's a good idea. Although I could technically cram these roles into 3 classes, I think there is enough variety in survival gameplay to allow for 4. These classes will be unchangeable once picked, and this will help with the class identity. Each class will be able to perform any of the 3 combat roles, with each having a different way of expressing it. Players will not be locked into a subclass and will be able to freely switch between them. Furthermore, each subclass shall share the same passives with other classes. It's how they activate them and apply them that will be determined by the playstyle and abilities of each class. The second factor will be their attributes. Attributes will be tied to the player's armor and food, similar to Enshrouded. The armor will help synergize with the combat role, and they can further specialize should they want to, or even build a hybrid role with the food that they eat or make in the game. The third factor goes back to each class being able to perform any of the 3 roles, or why they're able to. In my opinion, a class is only as fun as the problem they solve. In many games, support and tank are the least picked classes because the problems they solve are sometimes seen as boring or tedious. If each class has a different way to support, damage, or tank, then the performance of each role would keep things interesting. And if these classes have a unique way of performing each role, then class identity is left intact. I hope that all makes sense. I'm not trying to go into the specifics of each class because I'm kind of saving that for another video, and also I've not yet done the work for that, so got nothing to show quite yet. But there is a lot of talk about classes in video games and the presence of roles. However, their uniqueness in survival games is not talked about quite as much. I've definitely left a lot out in order to make this, even though 90% of what I just said is, in fact, just my opinion, but I am hoping to at least spark some discussion about this topic, if not for myself to see what you all suggest, then for the community of game designers and solo devs looking for some guidance. If you are not part of that community, then I hope that I was at least entertaining. In any case, thank you for watching, and good luck out there.